Oh, there we go. Oh my gosh, this is What is up, everybody? We are here. It is the Think Outside podcast with GSM. And so, in honor of Think Outside, we're both trying to stay inside. For me, because I'm cold, I'm Jack Dice. I'm a product development manager. And I'm here with JT Harden of F3 Media. I don't even know how to introduce you. What would you call? Are you an adopted child of GSM? Like, what's the analogy here?
Exclusive content creation for GSM. How about that? We'll just go with that. Yes,
That sounds fancy. I like that.
We were with GSM before they ever even owned a single fishing brand. In fact, I had to sign a non-disclosure to say, "Hey, we're going to buy Yamamoto baits." It's kind of how that all started. So it's been fun. We've been watching this entire company grow and grow and grow and expand. So it's an absolute blast to be part of this team.
Yeah, and so as part of the growth and expansion, at least what gets hammered home to me is we need new products. So that's kind of my job, is to try to make that happen. But really, it's, as you know, like, the best ideas and the best products really start with the end user, the anglers, and so that's where the best ideas come from. So who better to get those ideas from than the professional anglers that we have on our staff? And we're blessed to have a really pretty expansive, line of anglers that have experience, whether it be shallow, deep, clear water, muddy water. And we've got one of them today as a special guest, a guy who is I guess a savant. I would go as far as to say a savant in this category of fishing, and that's flipping and pitching with Fletcher Shryock. So we're going to bring him on today to talk about a bait that he had a lot to say on and a lot of back and forth details. Fletcher, thanks for hopping on with us.
Oh, I appreciate the savant thing. I've never been called that before, ever. So
you like that?
I appreciate that, though, Jack. I do. Yes. Holding the bait right here. It's been riding on the dash of my truck for about a year now. Just so I could, if we needed to tweak things, we've made a few changes to try to make it the best we could. And it's been sitting on my dash for a while. It's glad to see it's finally in stores. I see, I've been getting some photos that it's been in Walmart here, just recently dropped in Walmart. So it's really, really cool. And can't thank you guys enough for the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun designing this thing.
And what is that bait called?
It is the FAFO. What do you think that means, JT?
Well, you're asking the wrong person. Everybody knows I'm going to give a different answer than Jack's going to give on that one.
Well, I wanted to get your answer, and then we'll get Jack's answer.
Well, it's funny because you and I actually had that conversation like 2 years ago. I mean, this bait's taken literally probably a year to, development, testing, prototypes. But you and I, originally mentioned this to me like 2 years ago. Man, I really wish we had this in the lineup. This is how I do it. This is what I do. And you were modifying baits to make what you wanted, and then get with Jack and the whole GSM team and go to work on it. And now we got it, the flip around and find out. Now, that's not what I would say. Anyone on here that knows me knows probably what I would say.
That's what it is, though. Flip around and find out.
Jack had the perfect thing. Do we call it is it the FAFO or the FAFO? It's going to be like the Zaco and the Zaco.
I go with the long. I just say FAFO. I don't like either of the two. So there's 3 ways to go about it, I guess.
Split them in.
Now we got a third. Of course, you got to be difficult to come up with.
You got to spell it out. FAFO.
All right, we'll go with that.
So that's just what I've been doing anyway. But yeah, I'm pumped. I can't thank you guys enough for the opportunity. I think it's cool. It's just been a lot of fun designing this thing and working with you guys. So can't thank you all enough.
Well, let's talk about it. Like, you are someone, when I first got the chance to start working with you on products and get your input on other things, because you give input on a bunch of products. And the thing that I noticed really quickly is that you know exactly what you want in certain areas, certain baits, and why. When you have something that you have a lot of experience with, you really know the ins and outs of it. And that's nowhere is that more evident than the flipping bait. So of course, when it came to a flipping bait, like if I just gave you one question, you'd go off and you'd give me all these reasons of why, things that I'd never thought of. So when it came to this bait, when it came around to, okay, we need something, I need a better tool, a better mousetrap. Let's talk about like what makes this bait different. What is it? What does it do differently, and why, all the little details that we went back and forth on, and the tweaks that we made to get it just right.
Yeah, I mean, guys, there's a lot of baits out there that are designed very similar to this. Let's be honest, there is. It's like let's not reinvent the wheel. Is kind of where I was at with it. But what I wanted to have is I could go on and on, like you said. So I don't want to turn this podcast into a full blown Fletcher talking about every little facet of this and every little detail. But long story short, the measurements of this bait, the way the appendages are, the dimensions, the specific dimensions, all have a reason. The way the ribs are designed, and it's all little things. Because and this is where I don't want to get on a tangent with you guys, but one of the things I realized with flipping and pitching is not only just getting the bites, as it is, it's probably more so landing the fish, because a lot of times a flipping bait is a reaction bait most of the time, especially in a punching scenario. And this bait's definitely not just a punch bait. I would consider it more of a regular standard pitching bait. It's a great jig trailer too. I've been using it for a jig trailer. And this thing, I mean, I designed it with all basically the flipping baits out there, and I've wanted to build one that kind of incorporated all of that and still have the hookup in mind, basically. That's the short story of it. So that's why the ribs are turned around the way they are. If you'll notice on the back of the bait, there's larger ribs on the very back. That way you can expose your hook. Your hook's not buried in the body. You can really hide. You can expose the hook and then hide the hook point in the ribs. And for me, whenever I'm flipping, especially nowadays, like with the sonar, and the guys are catching them so dang good, like you can't miss or lose many, right? So your percentages have to go up a lot. And flipping is never a 100% game. It's never been that way for me. I don't think it is that way for anybody, but there's a lot of little intricacies to that, to using the right hook, right, the right plastic setup. And a lot of it's just small little minute details. And we just put it all into this thing, and I'm super pumped about it.
Yeah, that was the one thing I remembered, Fletch, you and I talking about for so long. You were like, it's the hookup ratio. I don't lose as many fish if I do it this way. And like you said, in this day and age, especially in your game, when you're competing for, that amount of money and all that kind of stuff, you need every ounce that you can get. Yeah, and I will say, obviously, this new bait worked. You just came off of a really good finish from the MMLF, and there's nothing that, like, to me, old school is watching you guys reel down and then just back bend it and set that hook. But when you're punching like you are, it's like you don't move. You just, that's
yeah, my back was a little sore after last week. It was fun. It was good to get back to that for a minute. Now we're at Lake Murray. It's going to be a totally different scene, but that's all right. But yeah, it was a fun week. It was good. It was perfect timing, I feel like, with the debut of the bait, the launch of the bait, and to go out there and catch them. And it was a fun week for sure.
Yeah, that's got to be gratifying, though. Just at least a little bit extra. Obviously, just doing well in a tournament's pretty gratifying, but just a little bit more to do it on the bait that you put so much time and effort into.
Yeah, I mean, the timing of it was perfect, right? So that was what the coolest part was. But yeah, back to what I was saying about the hookup ratio. That's obviously you got to get the bites, but you got to have a bait that will fold and get out of the way, and a bait that the body's not too long, and you still want to have the right. There's just so much little things. That's just like I've told you, Jack, many times. Like there's a lot of techniques that I can do. Like I can go throw a jerk bait. I can go do a lot of things that's mediocre for as a professional angler, I would say. But like there's a handful of things that I do. I think flipping's the one thing that I really have focused on. I feel like I know it really well, and like not that I'm the best or whatever, but I just feel like I know it for my own self. There's a lot of little intricate things that I just spent so much time doing, and I just tried to incorporate as much as I could into one bait. And I will say there's not one bait ever that's ever going to fill all the voids for flipping, but this is one that I built that I felt like was going to check the most boxes for one bait for sure.
So one of those boxes you got to check is obviously getting the bite. And let's dive into the appendages, like, because there's a lot of different baits on the market with different styles of appendages, and like you said, there's no one bait that fits all scenarios. But you were taking some of the best of different baits and trying to put them in together. You wanted these appendages to do something specific, and talk about that. Why are these not kicking legs? Why are these not big flappers?
Yeah, so a lot of flipping baits, a lot of baits in general just have a ton of action, as we know. Like, and I used to think whenever I started fishing that I wanted the most action was going to get me the most bites. And certain times in very low, if you think about it from a fish's perspective, they're in dirty water, stained water, in the dark. Yeah, you want something that moves a lot. But naturally, in normal water, normal colored water environments to clean water, there's not a lot of movement from bait fish. There's not a lot of movement from crawfish. They pick up on really, really subtle things. And I feel like they pick up on things that are erratic and different. And if you put flapping appendages that have a lot of action on the back of a bait in a clean water scenario, I really want that bait to glide and be natural. So the more action that you put on those appendages, the more that bait goes straight. It's up, down. If it's got a weight on it, it's up, down, because the appendages won't let it dart or slide around. What's perfect about these appendages on this bait is they have just a little bit of movement, but the bait still glides. And that's what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted just a subtle movement, but I want more of the bait gliding left to right. Like when you pick up on it, I want it to be able to dart around. Just like KVD talked about for years, erratic crankbaits, jerk baits, things like that. You want baits that'll, when it hits a piece of cover, it deflects off and maybe wanders off to the left for a second. That's the same thing I wanted out of a flipping bait, because what I've learned for years now, fishing a tube is still probably, now obviously not in a punching scenario, fishing a tube is still one of the best soft plastic baits on the market, besides from a Yamamoto Senko, in my opinion. If you guys look at a Senko, you guys will agree that it's still one of the best baits on the market. And what's it do? Almost nothing. It's so subtle. But what would you guys say across the country? 90% of the time, we're in semi-clear to clear water most of the year. You want the subtleness with just that little bit. Now, that's why Senko is going to outfish other stick baits or whatever you want to call it, because it has the salt, the way the bait shakes to the bottom. All that stuff obviously matters, because that's why they still sell so many of them. And the flipping bait's no different. It's more of a natural gliding action, and that's really erratic. And I feel like that triggers a lot of bites. A little bit of subtle kicking action, but it still darts from left to right. And that's what we accomplished with the FAFO.
Yes, you did. So what, like, as a guy that lives in the Midwest, obviously I'm on, Clearwater, Table Rock, and LOZ and all this. So like, what do you like? What sets a mat apart from, like, when you were down there, like at that event? What are you looking for that's maybe different? Are you looking for those holes to pitch in? I mean, kind of your setup that, like you said, it's all about getting the bites and your bait's reacting, but what are you looking for that kind of sets it apart, that the proper area to go and actually start flipping and pitching?
Yeah, and that's a loaded question, JT, obviously, and it all depends on scenario, different types of it. Even in Florida, I couldn't say, hey, this is the one thing you need to go do. I would say, generally speaking, for me, this is kind of just countrywide. I'm looking for the nastiest stuff I can fit a bait in. That's why it's flip around and find out. You literally try to pick out the heaviest bushes, the heaviest, thickest pine trees, the heaviest, thickest mats. That's where I like to fish, because over the years I've learned, and I've learned from all the other guys ahead of me, Greg Hackney and so on, all those guys, and just watching them. And honestly, that's where, well, for years until we had forward facing sonar, that's where a lot of the bigger bass were caught. Was either, they're out there in deeper water or they're deeper in the covers, what I've always come to learn. And that couldn't be more than true now. Obviously, now the fish aren't necessarily deep that are out there over deep water, but they're over deep water or they're deeper in the cover. That's where they seek shelter. That's where they want to hunt at. So just finding the thickest stuff to flip around and find out, that's the deal.
You showed me that personally when you and I fished Gunnersville. That was really, like, literally, I'm an old guy, but that was my first time. And you were pulling bass out of stuff that I'd been like, I would have drove my boat by. I'm like, man, ain't no way I'm getting anything down through that. And you just start, the old flapping hog, I think is what you were using back, then, but
Yep.
you were coming out with this. And that's really when your and I's conversation started about what you're looking for and what you want to design from there. And I'm just like, I was blown away, just like punching it, ounce and a half, whatever, down through that thick stuff was just like completely new to what I've, grown up fishing.
Yeah, for sure. And it does, like I said, this isn't just a punching bait whatsoever. I would have to say it's more just a good general pitching bait than it even is for punching, if I really had to rate it that way. I mean, it's a great punch bait, obviously, but I really geared it more towards, because not most places in the country, you're not going to be able to punch mats like we do, in say Florida and like Gunnersville, most of the places is a lot of flipping and pitching boat docks and wood and things like that. And that's really what this bait, that was really what I designed it for, was just that overall general, be able to do everything with, try to be able to do as much as you can with just one bait. Have a good hookup ratio, make sure it gets bites, it's sized right, just then being able to hold the hook point, just all those things, like I said, is all a big deal. At the end of the day, it's a fishing lure. It's not rocket science, but I seem to sure make it into, that to be sometimes, huh, Jack?
Just well, I mean, just a little bit. Like you said, you can't reinvent the wheel. You have to stick
Correct.
with because we're solving the same problem, right? A bush is a bush. A log is a log. A mat is a mat. That doesn't change. But the little details that you put on the rim of your wheel, you went into very fine detail about all of those. Because at that point, if you're trying to separate in like again, people have been pitching and flipping cover forever. You got to get that refined with every little detail if you want to actually have an edge, especially for you where you're actually competing. But no matter what different types of cover you're fishing, you talk about mats. Obviously, you're using a heavyweight. I wanted to ask you a question. I think just basic information about weight sizes and how that changes the action on a bait. The rate of fall obviously matters a lot with pitching and flipping. You mentioned that this is mostly a reaction bite. Like how do you dictate your weight size for someone who's never flipped before? If they're going to grab a pack of FAFOs, what are they, and they're going to pick a weight size, like how do they know where to start? Is it based on cover, water temperature? How do you go about that?
That's one of them questions I could sit here and talk for 30 minutes on. But I'll just say, generally speaking, most places in the country, just general cover, bushes, docks, rocks, trees, I'm 5/16 to 3/8. If I'm in 0 to say 3 to 4 foot of water, I'm 5/16. I don't go to a quarter a whole lot, but I might if they're really, really shallow. But then if I'm, maybe 3 or 4 foot a little bit deeper, I'll go to a half, maybe even to 10 foot or whatever, which I don't flip a lot in 5 to 10. But if it happens to be high water scenarios or deeper timber and things like that, I'll go to say a ½ ounce or maybe even a 3/4 if I'm really trying to get a reaction bite. But another thing I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention on the design of this bait is I do a lot of what I call skip pitching. Under boat docks, under overhanging trees. Guys, if you try to do that with okay, we'll just say, and I'm not trying to dog any bait out there. I'm just trying to say, if you try to do that with a Yamacraw, if you try to take a Yamacraw and skip it under a dock, it won't get there because the appendages catch. And there's so many baits that, now obviously a Yamacraw is a totally different scenario, but the point that I'm trying to make is I wanted a bait that also would skip really well. That way for overhanging trees, I can skip it up under bushes. I can skip it all the way back under boat docks. If you have them appendages where they start flapping and they catch water, the bait won't skip. And that's one, there's a couple baits out there that I really like that are on the, that are on the market now that are great lures, but you can't skip them. And if you can't get that bait back to where they're at and it be subtle, then you're not going to get that bite. You're going to spook that fish. So that was another big deal, is I wanted a bait that I could skip flip and skip around that was subtle enough that once it landed where it was, landed in its spot, it didn't splash hard, didn't grab a lot of water, just skipped in there and she's swimming off with it. So that was another big thing too. So, but as far as the weights, like I said, 3/8 is a good way to go, ½ ounce. And then when you get around that heavy stuff, man, I usually just go 1.25 ounces, 1.5 ounces, honestly. If it's maybe a little bit sparser, you'll be able to tell. You might want to go back to a 1 ounce, but for the most part, it's 3/8, half, and then 1.5. I mean, if you're in the real nasty grass, and then you can kind of figure it out from there, is the best way I could put it in short. So
now we have the SAFO, the skip around and find out too.
I like that.
When Fletcher's saying it's not required, the FAFO does all of it.
That's true.
That's true.
Right.
Well, we don't need no more. This is
That's
it.
right. Just whatever you want to call it.
I do like that though.
So do you are you straight shank, EWG? What's your kind of go-to on your hook?
Yeah, I mean, this bait will work really well with an EWG. I don't flip and pitch with an EWG, but a lot of guys do. Like, it's a great hook. I've got my reasons for it, but a lot of guys catch a lot of fish. I think a lot of it's like hook set, the way guys swing, just different things. There's so many little nuances, believe it or not, to that. I try to do a lot of pull setting, but it's a hard pull set. So I feel like with an EWG for me, I'll just kind of get into like a little bit of the details of why. So I want that straight shank. And if you look at a straight shank, it fits like this, and that your eyes down here, it's hard to show you guys. I want this gap here, right? If you got an EWG, the hook is almost pointed more towards the eye. There's not much gap there. So what I discovered for me is a lot of times I would hook them in the throat or hook them in the top of the mouth, but it wouldn't, the hook would go more straight out instead of gaffing the meat of their face or, you know, their lip, whatever. And that EWG a lot of times would skin hook them. You'd have them pegged for a little while. Maybe you go to swing them in the boat or whatever, and you would tear the skin, basically. So that's why I like a straight shank. But I know a lot of guys will bend that EWG up a lot, and this bait will hold an EWG extremely, extremely well. And it wouldn't surprise me if you didn't almost catch more with this bait the way the hook cavity is designed in the back, just because you'll be able to barely texpose an EWG, and that thing will ride in its spot. Basically, what I'm saying is that EWG is like so close to being, they're so close to being hooked as soon as they start swimming off with it compared to some of the other baits out there, basically. And it's going to hold the hook point good around all the heavy cover you run it across, but when she bites it, it's going to pop out really easy. And that was something that I wanted to have with this bait, obviously.
Very nice. Well, I know, like, you know, wintertime around here, I use a wobble head a lot, you know, big bite wobble head, a biffle head, whatever you guys want to call it. But when we first got those baits in, that's what I was testing it with. And I think, like you said, that slow, subtle, if I put something on that's got a lot of movement, it's wintertime here, they're not biting it. We got to be really slow. I mean, I'm dragging that thing across the bottom. And I had a lot of good bites when I first got those packages in, testing it out. And that's what I was catching them on, was wobblehead, you know, because it's just so subtle and so slow, and it's not bait going crazy where they're just not biting it. And that's another thing around the, you know, the lakes around here in the wintertime. That was awesome. That's how we caught a lot of the fish.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be. I have not used it on a wobblehead yet, but it'll definitely work really good on that. And like, guys, I'm not trying to knock a Yama crawl or anything with action. All that stuff has its time and its place. I'm just saying, for a lot of the stuff that I do, when it comes to flipping and pitching, I just steer more towards those more subtle actions. But I absolutely use a Yama crawl a lot on the back of a swim jig, and there's a lot of different things I use it for too. But like you said, JT, when the water's a little bit colder, that's another thing. You don't want something that's got overpowering, because everything in the water is slowed down a little bit, and they want something more subtle even in cold water too. So yeah, it's definitely going to be good on a wobblehead, I think.
So yeah, that is a good question. I think for someone who doesn't know, maybe you take it for granted, but yeah, when do you choose a Yama craw or, you know, a kamikaze craw, or, you know, anything that kicks more? You know, even the fighting frog from Big Bite versus, you know, a tube or a FAFO, a FAFO, a FAFO, whatever you want to call it. When do you choose an action bait versus a subtle bait?
Man, honestly, Jack, if I'm being 100% honest, like, unless I'm fishing, if I'm ever going to flip a Yama craw, it's going to be more like grass line type stuff with a 3/4 or 1 ounce weight, clear water, deeper stuff, which is not very often anymore. But I will use a Yama craw a ton. The 3-inch on a Carolina rig up north is awesome on smallmouth. It is absolutely the best swim bait, or I'm sorry, the swim jig trailer. Like when I swim, and I love to swim a jig a lot because I like to fish shallow. And honestly, that might be my second favorite thing to do to flipping is swim a jig. It's definitely better than frog fishing for me. Like I love swimming a jig almost as much as I like flipping. And that's what's great for the Yama craw is it's got that action when you're pumping that jig. It's just it's a totally different situation. And you're trying to draw fish to that bait that's already dry. It's already going straight anyway. So I'm just adding action to it. I don't want a swim jig to dart left and right and do that hunting action that I was talking about. That's where the Yama craws really come in. But I'm not telling you guys, you cannot take a Yama craw and go flipping into bushes and mats and have like a great, you know, and really catch them. For me, I try to stick with the more subtle stuff on the flipping and pitching stuff.
Yep. Water temp has a lot for us to do. I mean, it's the summer months or the spring months when the spawn's happening. That's when I go with that faster moving bait, you know. But I'm no pro. You two are.
Well, everyone's got a different way of looking at it too. Like everyone's had different experiences and different things. Like over the years of doing this, I've done it long enough that I've kind of seen And like I say, I've done it long enough. Meaning, I've just studied enough of the guys around me, and I'm friends with some of the I'm friends with the best in the business. Honestly, like I'm not saying that I am, but I'm friends with some guys that are really, really good. And you hang around the right people for years, you start to figure out, not only what works for me, but what works for them too. And you start to put all these pieces together, and you will. What's funny about doing this out here is I was talking to Andy Morgan a couple hours ago, and we were talking about just here at Murray, just general things, nothing crazy, but we were just discussing, and it's so funny. Like we can sit there and agree. Most of the pro anglers out here can almost sit here and agree on 80 to 90% of the stuff that we talk about. Like there's not very many outliers for the guys that's out here doing it full time. There's not a whole lot of outliers out there where a guy says, "Oh, I would rather do this," and I would say, "Oh no, I'd rather do that." Like so many times we are so close, it's not even funny. And a lot of the stuff that we talk about, we don't think the other person even knows sometimes. So we'll go to say it and they'll pick up right where I left off. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so funny that we're all just kind of figured out the same thing over time. So
That's what's kind of cool. I mean, with us doing this with GSM and kind of being there from the first time they bought Yamamoto and dealing with all of you guys behind the scenes and Jack being, I mean, Jack at his age knows more about bait designs and I'm twice his age than I'll ever know. But it's so cool to sit and listen to a group of you guys talk about the action, the design, like you said, you were very picky about this because you knew exactly what you wanted. It wasn't being picky. It's like, this is what I want. This is what I want to design. But listening to the changing this one thing or changing that and making a reaction. And then literally in my office, getting them in because we're shooting the underwater content. We're shooting all this stuff and seeing those baits completely different. And I might think it's great. And then all of a sudden I get on a phone call with all you guys like, oh man, this thing's junk. I'm like, really? I thought I like caught fish on it. I thought it was great, and you're like, no, man, it's terrible. We got to do this. And you tear it apart and you guys throw it away and you melt it. And I'm like, okay, well, proves that I know nothing. But
well,
but
you're
it's cool
also
just to
it's
see the
also
whole design aspect and come together from start to finish is awesome.
yeah, it's really hard to get a product. I mean, with so much products out there on the market, I really think it's hard. It's very hard to hit a home run with a bait nowadays. Like, because we're all just basically, I mean, we're taking the same bait category that was made how long, 20, 30, 40 years ago with some of these baits. I'm just talking generally speaking. And we just keep trying to tweak it and redefine it. And like, I might have, like, the thump jig's a perfect example. Like, it's a heavy cover jig, but I didn't necessarily design that jig to be flipped in and out of the nastiest, gnarliest bushes and pine trees and things like that. It's a flipping jig, but it's more of a general purpose pitching around docks, stumps, wood, rocks. It's going to get bites. Like it's not. So when you say flipping, it kind of goes into a couple different categories in a flipper's mind. This is just an example of what I'm talking about. And it's the same with swim baits. It's the same with minnow flicking. It's the same with wacky rigging. But anyway, back to what I was saying with the jig, like I designed it more of a general purpose, pitching it around sparser cover, isolated cover. That's why I chose the hook, the angle. So if you go taking it to Rayburn when the water's 3 feet high and you go trying to throw that thing in the nastiest of bushes, it's not going to be the best jig for that scenario. But I designed it to get more bites around general pitching conditions. That makes so it's really hard to design a bait that's a one like that just checks every single box. It'll never happen. But I think what we do as anglers, we have a certain, like for me in the flipping categories, I have certain jigs that I'll use in that high water bush scenario if I want to use a jig. But most of the time when I'm pitching a jig, it's the thump jig, most general pitching. So same thing goes with the flipping bait. Like this one I designed, I feel like checks the most boxes you could possibly check to take it anywhere in the country and catch fish flipping and pitching. The profile, just the whole thing. So does that make sense of what I'm getting at? Like, you'll never
Oh
check
yeah,
every box for everybody. So,
absolutely.
but I think even
Yeah.
the colors that you guys have, Big Bite's got some really badass colors. Like, just generally speaking, if you go on, I remember you guys sent me an email or a text there a couple months ago asking about colors, and I sat there and I tried to like find a color or find because I'm sure like surely there's something they're missing. I'm gonna give them some good information here, and I literally went through the website, went through all the colors, and I'm like, no, y'all checked every single box. And if there was a color, I didn't even send anything back. I'm like, no, you guys are good. 2 thumbs up. And you know me, Jack, if there was a color that was missing in the arsenal, I would say something, right?
A
And you
hundred
guys nailed
percent.
it. So, but anyhow,
So talking
Jack,
about those details, like you talk about, you and Andy and all these other guys you run with who do the same thing as you. When you think you're being sneaky, I figured this thing out. You realize he's figured it out. He's figured it out. What are some of the, like, for the average person? Give us some juice. What are those things that people don't pick up on that they miss when they go to pitching and flipping?
I'll say something here that I won't talk about a whole lot, but Andy and I fished the team series deal last year together, and we were sitting there ready for takeoff that morning. And it's not that we don't share everything. It's not like I'm trying to hide and be sneaky. It's just there's so many little things, and I also honestly sometimes you don't want everyone to know that you're paying that close attention to everything. You know what I mean? I just want to. Everyone wants to be that guy. It's like, it's fine. I'll just throw it out there, dude. None of these guys it's fine. No, that none of these guys out here do that. They might play off like they're just out there fishing. I'll just grab a hook and tie it on. None of them are like that. But anyhow, we're sitting there getting ready that morning. We're kind of game planning what we're going to do on this team series deal, who's going to where. And Andy's like, man, that's a good hook right there. I was like, yeah. It's like, oh, look at that barb. I said, yeah. I said, I hand-picked those. I probably had to go through 50 hooks to get those handful you got. You know what I mean? He's like, oh, I do the same thing. I said, what do you mean? He's like, I got piles of hooks. I give them to my buddies. I won't use them. The barbs ain't big enough. See, I'll just get them ones that got the right barbs on them. And I just started losing it laughing. Like, you're not getting anything. You know what I mean? It's not like it's that big of a deal. Like, it wasn't a secret. Like, my barbs are going to be the reason why I beat or don't beat Andy. Like, that's not the case. But it was just funny that I started to mention it subtly, and he just picked up on exactly what I was saying, So that's kind of one of the things. If you wanted a little bit of juice, that's some of the things that we get into. That's what first come to mind, And there's a lot of little things, but that was definitely one of them. Basically, when they make hooks, any fish hook, and you don't always want a big barb for a lot of techniques. A lot of techniques, you don't want a big barb if you're casting and doing different things because you want that hook to penetrate. But when you're flipping and pitching and you set the hook hard and you're doing everything right, yada, 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 you want to have big barbs because if you're dropping the hammer on them, once you get them hooked, they don't come off. But you'll notice if you start looking at hooks, they're all built a little bit different. Every crankbait's built a little bit different. That's why you get there's certain rattle traps that are louder than others. There's certain ones that are more silent than others. Like, there's a lot of little things that we can get into. Does it always make a difference? No. When you're around good biting fish, then I don't think it always matters, but sometimes it can, at least in our minds. If you have the right stuff, it helps a lot. So what do you think about the barb deal, Jack?
As long as anything where I get to swing hard on them, I don't care. I'm all about that. So, I mean, I'm not as much of a flipper as you. And this is where, for me, as much as like where I get a lot of joy from my job is getting to talk to you in detail and hear all those little things. And there's a lot of it where, obviously you experience it, but it's almost like it gets made manifest when you talk it out with someone like, oh yeah, I remember that. I switched to that hook and that made the difference. And the why. You're like, yeah, it's because they had the bigger barb. And that's why you actually kept them on. Those little things that sometimes, that I either miss, and that's why it's a joy to get to talk to anglers like you in scenarios like this. So I appreciate all the insight you've given me over the years, getting to learn stuff.
Dude, you're a beast yourself in your own right now. You're not on the Elite Series yet, but you know quite a bit yourself, man. So I appreciate that. But I've learned a lot that you've taught me over the time here too. So I appreciate that.
It's funny you said the thing about the hooks though, because we had some samples, I believe, at ICAST a year ago. I won't say what bait because it did change, but I remember the samples came in and it wasn't quite the right hook. And as I'm sitting in the booth, at least a half a dozen of you pro anglers picked it up and said, yeah, I'm not really a fan of that hook. And it was so funny that I was like, dude, it's not the right hook. But the fact that you one after another caught the exact same thing. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that hook. And then listening to you guys, well, it's not pointed down. It's pointed down too much, or it doesn't line up with the eye. I mean, I'm just sitting there listening going, I just heard that. And I'm like, it's just a sample. It's not right.
Yeah, I think you guys have an awesome pro staff, and you guys actually utilize the pro staff. Obviously, without mentioning companies, but I've been involved with ones where they kind of like to do their own thing and like just, here's the product and not really get a lot of anglers' input on it. And not that we're experts or whatever, or like know exactly everything, but I feel like That's one thing that you guys do at GSM is you actually have your anglers involved. There's input on every single thing you put out. Even if it's no input, that's good. You know, like that's a huge deal, I think, in this industry, especially now, because like I said, we're getting to the point where the wheel is the wheel. We just got to find a way to make a better wheel. I want a little bit of chrome, a little bit of flat black, a little, you know what I mean? Like that's all we're trying to do. So if you have a good pro staff, obviously, and you listen to them, which you guys do, I just think that helps everything along the way. And you guys will be light years ahead of other companies just for doing that, in my opinion. Especially when you take everyone's opinion in as a whole, you know.
Certainly
It's
try.
a good team.
Well, I gotta bounce. I gotta try to register for a tournament. I know you're trying to get some stuff rigged for a tournament on Murray. So for those, thank you to everybody for tuning in. If you're not following Fletcher Shryock, where can they follow you, Fletcher?
Facebook and Instagram, F Shryock and FS Fish on Facebook. F Shryock on Instagram and FS Fish on Facebook. Jack, good luck out there at that Open, man. You did great at the last one. Keep it going, dude. You're killing it.
We're gonna try.
JT, stay out of trouble.
Mind, I just need a fish to listen to my,
Not happening.
Is good, but the fish, I don't know if they'll listen to it. We'll find out.
Well,
One thing I want to say here right now, the FAFO is available at Walmart's right now, and if any of you are going to the Bassmaster Classic, stop by, see Fletch, see the team. They will have these baits in there, and I believe we're going to have them at another booth for sale, right, Jack, at the Classic?
Yeah, our retailer partners should have them there at the Classic, so that's really where you can the masses can get them. They're I think in some Walmarts now, but they're really going to kind of hit a bunch of stores around the Classic. So if you're in Fort Worth, definitely come check us out and come check out the bait in person.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate everything.
Oh, there we go.
Oh my gosh, this is